At the Earth's Core by Edgar Rice Burroughs. 15. The Garden of Eden, Part 2. Picking up my sword, I leant upon it, looking down on the body of my foeman, and as I thought of the battle I had just fought and won, a great idea was born in my brain, the outcome of this, and the suggestion that Perry had made within the city of Voutras. If skill and science could render a comparative pygmy the master of this mighty brute, what could not the brute's fellows accomplish with the same skill and science? Why, all Pellucidar would be at their feet, and I would be their king, and Diane their queen. Diane! A little wave of doubt swept over me. It was quite within the possibilities of Diane to look down upon me even were I king. She was quite the most superior person I had ever met, with the most convincing way of letting you know that she was superior. Well, I could go to the cave and tell her that I had killed Jubal, and then she might feel more kindly toward me, since I had freed her of her tormentor. I hoped that she had found the cave easily. It would be terrible to have lost her again, and I turned to gather up my shield and bow to hurry after her, when to my astonishment I have found her standing not 10 paces behind me. "Girl," I cried, "what are you doing here? I thought that you had gone to the cave, as I told you to do." Up went her head, and the look that she gave me took all the majesty out of me, and left me feeling more like the palace janitor, if palaces have janitors. "As you told me to do," she cried, stamping her little foot. "I do as I please. I am the daughter of a king, and furthermore, I hate you." I was dumbfounded. This was my thanks for having saved her from Jubal. I turned and looked at the corpse. "May be that I saved you from a worse fate, old man," I said, but I suppose it was lost on Diane, for she never seemed to notice at all. "Let us go to my cave," I said. "I'm tired and hungry." She followed along a pace behind me, neither of us speaking. I was too angry, and she evidently didn't care to converse with the lower orders. I was mad all the way through, as I had certainly felt that at least a word of thanks should have rewarded me, for I knew that even by her own standards I must have done a very wonderful thing to have killed the redoubtable Jubal in hand-to-hand combat. We had no difficulty in finding my lair, and then I went down into the valley and bowled over a small antelope, which I dragged up the steep ascent to the ledge before the door. Here we ate in silence. Occasionally I glanced at her, thinking that the sight of her tearing at raw flesh with her hands and teeth like some wild animal would cause a revulsion of my sentiments toward her. But to my surprise I found that she ate quite as daintily as the most civilized woman of my acquaintance, and finally I found myself gazing in foolish rapture at the beauties of her strong white teeth. Such is love. After our repast, we went down to the river together and bathed our hands and faces, and then, after drinking our fill, went back to the cave. Without a word, I crawled into the farthest corner, and curling up, was soon asleep. When I awoke, I found Diane sitting in the doorway looking out across the valley. As I came out, she moved to one side to let me pass, but she said no word to me. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. Every time I looked at her, something came up in my throat, so that I nearly choked. I had never been in love before, but I did not need any aid in diagnosing my case. God, how I loved that beautiful, disdainful, tantalizing, prehistoric girl. After we had eaten again, I asked Diane if she intended returning to her tribe now that Jubal was dead, but she shook her head sadly, and said that she did not dare, for there was still Jubal's brother to be considered, his oldest brother. "What has he to do with it?" I asked. "Does he want you too? Or has the option on you become a family heirloom, to be passed down from generation to generation?" She was not quite sure what I meant. "It is probable," she said, "that they will all want revenge for the death of Jubal. There are 7 of them. 7 terrible men. Someone may have to kill them all if I am to return to my people." It began to look as though I had assumed a contract much too large for me, about 7 sizes, in fact. "Has Jubal any cousins?" I asked. It was just as well to know the worst at once. "Yes," replied Diane, "but they do not count. They all have mates. Jubal's brothers have no mates because Jubal could not get one for himself. He was so ugly that women ran away from him. Some of them have thrown themselves from the cliffs of Amoth into the Dar el-Az rather than mate with the ugly one." "But what had that to do with his brothers?" I asked. "I forget that you are not of Pellucidar," said Diane, with a look of pity mixed with contempt, and the contempt seemed to be laid on a little thicker than the circumstance warranted, as though to make quite certain that I shouldn't overlook it. "You see," she continued, "a younger brother may not take a mate until his older brothers have done so, unless the older brother waives his prerogative, which Jubal would not do, knowing that as long as he kept them single, they would be all the keener in aiding him to secure a mate." Noticing that Diane was becoming more communicative, I began to entertain hopes that she might be warming up toward me a bit, although upon what slender thread I hung my hopes I soon discovered. "As you dare not return to Amos," I ventured, "what is to become of you, since you cannot be happy here with me, hating me as you do?" "I shall have to put up with you," she replied coldly, "until you see fit to go elsewhere and leave me in peace. Then I shall get along very well, alone." I looked at her in utter amazement. It seemed incredible that even a prehistoric woman could be so cold, heartless, and ungrateful. Then I arose. "I shall leave you now," I said haughtily. "I have had quite enough of your ingratitude and your insults." And then I turned and strode majestically down toward the valley. I had taken 100 steps in absolute silence, and then Diane spoke. "I hate you," she shouted, and her voice broke. In rage, I thought. I was absolutely miserable, but I hadn't gone too far when I began to realize that I couldn't leave her alone there without protection, to hunt her own food amidst the dangers of that savage world. She might hate me and revile me, and heap indignity after indignity upon me, as she already had, until I should have hated her. But the pitiful fact remained that I loved her, and I couldn't leave her there alone. The more I thought about it, the madder I got, so that by the time I reached the valley I was furious, and the result of it was that I turned right round and went up that cliff again as fast as I had come down. I saw that Diane had left the ledge and gone within the cave, but I bolted right in after her. She was lying on her face on the pile of grasses I had gathered for her bed. When she heard me enter, she sprang to her feet like a tigress. "I hate you," she cried. Coming from the brilliant light of the noonday sun into the semi-darkness of the cave, I could not see her features, and I was rather glad, for I disliked to think of the hate that I should have read there. I never spoke a word to her at first. I just strode across the cave and grasped her by the wrists, and when she struggled I put my arm around her so as to pinion her hands to her sides. She fought like a tigress, but I took my free hand and pushed her head back. I imagined that I had suddenly turned brute, and I had gone back to 1,000 million years, and was again a veritable caveman taking my mate by force. And then I kissed that beautiful mouth again and again. "Diane," I cried, shaking her roughly, "I love you. Can't you understand that I love you? That I love you better than all else in this world or my own? That love like mine cannot be denied?" I noticed that she lay very still in my arms now, and as my eyes became accustomed to the light, I saw that she was smiling, a very contented, happy smile. I was thunderstruck. Then I realized that very gently she was trying to disengage her arms, and I loosened my grip upon them so that she could do so. Slowly they came up and stole around my neck, and then she drew my lips down to hers once more and held them there for a long time. At last she spoke. "Why didn't you do this at first, David? I have been waiting for so long." "What?" I cried. "You said that you hated me." "Did you expect me to run into your arms and say that I loved you before I knew that you loved me?" she asked. "But I have told you right along that I love you," I said. "Love speaks in acts," she replied. "You could have made your mouth say what you wished it to say, but just now when you came in and took me in your arms, your heart spoke to mine in the language that a woman's heart understands. What a silly man you are, David." "Then you haven't hated me at all, Diane?" I asked. "I have loved you always," she whispered, "from the moment that I saw you, although I did not know it until the time that you struck down Hooja, the Sly One, and then spurned me." "But I didn't spurn you, dear," I cried. "I didn't know your ways. I doubt if I do now. It seems incredible that you could have reviled me so, and yet have cared for me all the time." "You might have known," she said, "when I did not run away from you, that it was not hate which chained me to you. While you were battling with Jubal, I could have run to the edge of the forest, and when I learned the outcome of the combat, it would have been the simplest thing to have eluded you and returned to my own people." "But Jubal's brothers and cousins," I reminded her. "How about them?" She smiled and hid her face on my shoulder. "I had to tell you something, David," she whispered. "I must needs have some excuse for remaining near you." "You little sinner," I exclaimed, "and you have caused me all this anguish for nothing." "I have suffered even more," she answered simply, "for I thought that you did not love me, and I was helpless. I could not come to you and demand that my love be returned, as you have just come to me. Just now, when you went away, hope went with you. I was wretched, terrified, miserable, and my heart was breaking. I wept, and I have not done that since before my mother died." And now I saw that there was the moisture of tears about her eyes. It was near to making me cry myself when I thought of all that poor child had been through, motherless and unprotected, hunted across a savage, primeval world by that hideous brute of a man, exposed to the attacks of the countless fearsome denizens of its mountains, its plains, and its jungles. It was a miracle she had survived at all. To me it was a revelation of the things my early forebears must have endured, that the human race of the outer crust might survive. It made me very proud to think that I had won the love of such a woman. Of course she couldn't read or write, there was nothing cultured or refined about her as you judge culture and refinement. But she was the essence of all that is best in woman, for she was good and brave and noble and virtuous. And she was all these things in spite of the fact that their observance entailed suffering and danger and possible death. How much easier it would have been to have gone to Jubal in the first place. She would have been his lawful mate. She would have been queen in her own land, and it meant just as much to the cave woman to be a queen in the Stone Age as it does to the woman of today to be a queen now. It's all comparative glory any way you look at it, and if there were only naked savages on the outer crust today, you would find that it would be considerable glory to be the wife of a native chief. I couldn't help but compare Diane's action with that of a splendid young woman I had known in New York. I mean splendid to look at and to talk to. She had been head over heels in love with a chum of mine, a clean, manly chap, but she had married a broken-down, disreputable old debauchee because he was a count in some dinky little European principality that was not even accorded a distinctive colour by Rand McNally. Yes, I was very proud of Diane. After a time we decided to set out for Sari, as I was anxious to see Perry and to know that all was right with him. I had told Diane about our plan of emancipating the human race of Pellucidar, and she was fairly wild over it. She said that if Dakor, her brother, would only return, he could easily be king of Amoz, and that then he and Gach could form an alliance. That would give us a flying start, for the Sarians and the Amozites were both very powerful tribes. Once they had been armed with swords and bows and arrows and trained in their use, we were confident that they could overcome any tribe that seemed disinclined to join the great army of federated states with which we were planning to march upon the Mahars. I explained the various destructive engines of war that Perry and I could construct after a little experimentation. Gunpowder, rifles, cannon, and the like, and Diane would clap her hands and throw her arms around my neck and tell me what a wonderful thing I was. She was beginning to think that I was omnipotent, although I really hadn't done anything but talk. The first time we started for Sari, I stepped into a nest of poisonous vipers before we reached the valley. A little fellow stung me on the ankle, and Diane made me come back to the cave. She said that I mustn't exercise, or it might prove fatal. If it had been a full-grown snake that had struck me, she said, I wouldn't have moved a single pace from the nest. I'd have died in my tracks, so virulent is the poison. As it was, I must have been laid up for quite a while, though Diane's poultices of herbs and leaves finally reduced the swelling and drew out the poison. The episode proved most fortunate, however, as it gave me an idea which added 1,000-fold to the value of my arrows as missiles of offence and defence. As soon as I was able to be about again, I sought out some adult vipers of the species which had stung me, and having killed them, extracted their virus, smearing it upon the tips of several arrows. Later I shot a hyenodon with one of these, and though my arrow inflicted but a superficial flesh wound, the beast crumpled in death almost immediately after he was hit. We now set out once more for the land of the Sarians, and it was with feelings of sincere regret that we bade goodbye to our beautiful Garden of Eden, in the comparative peace and harmony of which we had lived the happiest moments of our lives. How long we had been there I do not know, for as I have told you, time had ceased to exist for me beneath that eternal noonday sun. It may have been an hour or a month of earthly time. I do not know.